Now, you had a book that came out. Do you deal with that story? Is that the narrative you present there?
And the book is called Maidan.
Ukraine crisis, what it means for the West.
Ukraine crisis, what it means for the West. Okay.
Scandalously cheap. €13.
Yeah, I bought it.
Well, it's about three things. Ukraine is the middle third, the kind of meat, really. But Ukraine crisis is kind of a misleading name because it's pejorative. As I said, answer to the first question, the original aim was to change things for the better. Plus, it's, Russia's crisis. Russia caused it. Russia's the aggressor. So the first third is about Russia and Russia's pathologies. And there's a good bit in there about the West as well and our relative failure to show proper solidarity with Ukraine and properly deter Russia.
So do you think the election is an attempt to break with the crisis and bring it back to progress and reform? Or where in that narrative does the election fit?
Well, President Poroshenko used the kind of standard metaphor yesterday. The election should reboot the political system. So that's the aim. Maybe not completely, but,
a fresh start.
There'll be fresh faces who will push for a fresh
start.
I've
seen that line a lot.
And Balasz, there is a lot. We talked in Ukraine, in Kiev today. The main discussion are there. Will this parliament would be different? Will it be the change of the system? We have the activist, a journalist, some new figures coming to the parliament. The old party of regions is more or less broken, though there are a couple of parties running with the different names, like the opposition bloc. But will it be the reboot of the system, having the oligarchs also in some list of the new democratic pro-European forces?
Well, first of all, thanks for having me. As this is the best, really one of the best projects, and I'm enjoying watching you guys from the very beginning. And this is certainly the best view in any TV I ever been. So congratulations for the studio. Well, I actually would, like the original question is what exactly this election means. It's a promise which Maidan and Poroshenko and the political elite gave after, for the post-Yanukovych period. It's simply exactly as you guys saying that it needs to be a rebooting of the political system. It needs to be after the presidential elections. It needs to be a new parliament. It needs to be fresh faces, the new blood or the fresh blood into the parliament, which I believe is going to be happening. I think we're going to see some surprises, at least for Westerners. It's going to be a lot of surprises in these elections. At the same time, and I'm always trying to emphasize it, that both Russia and the EU and the West is seeing Ukraine through their own lenses. For Russia, we know this is all about Nazism and all the rest, and for the West, is about also their own insecurity. And their own issues
What is the insecurity? What's the root of that?
The insecurity is basically that, like, for example, George Soros wrote a very nice piece about Ukraine and saying, this is all about us, this is all about us, this is all about us. And I always explain Ukraine with three things. Inequality, huge inequality in Ukraine, and growing inequality in the European Union, in the West in general. Erosion of traditional institutions. Here, particularly, is the breakdown of the central authority or the central government. And the third, because of rent-seeking, political corruption, and all these factors exist and actually increasing in the West as well. So I do believe, plus look at the traditional institutions. Who are the most noisy about Ukraine? Poland and the Baltics. Why? They don't have army. They heavily rely on the NATO, and like what we see, I believe that this is a crisis in a 21st century. Russia is offering a 19th century solutions, right? A saint coalition again against the revolutionaries, and we're trying to mobilize the West, our institutions from the 20th centuries, the NATO and the EU, and I'm not sure, and this is where the insecurity is coming from.
What is the 20th century or 21st century answer to the European Union is the answer to the 19th century?
No, I don't think actually neither the 19th century what Russia is offering or the 20th century is the solution. I think we're seeing an absolutely new situation, a very unique situation after the breakdown of the central authority, and how Ukraine, which is very diverse, and that's what we're going to see after the parliament elections, a very diverse parliament. I don't want to call it fragmented, but diverse. So it shouldn't be the unity what we're looking for, but a diversity what we actually should embrace.
You mentioned there will be some surprises for the Westerners. What are they? Surprise them now already.
Well, Balasz mentioned the likelihood that self-help, samopomocz, and maybe even civic position will do well, which are the closest thing to a party of the good guys, the party of the Maidan activists. I mean, there are plenty of those in the other parties, but these are the ones where they're concentrated, as it were. The other big surprise, well, to locals, I guess it won't be a surprise that Russophile parties, a so-called Russia bloc, will get into parliament. One's called the opposition bloc, maybe the communists, and also a party called Strong Ukraine. We're in a very strange position. You probably won't like me saying this, but maybe we should wish for them to get in, because then at least Russia works through those guys, tries to have influence through political means, and doesn't use military pressure or turn the gas off this winter.
For me, exactly. I think if the first polls, I mean, the last polls were correct, we're going to see a surge of Samopomic into the parliament. It is going to be actually a surprise, I believe, for many Westerners, simply because this is coming from it's a very detailed from Lviv. But Samopomic exists for 10 years. It's nothing new for the locals. But it's something which is still alien in Ukraine, because there's the vast majority of the Ukrainians say, please, state, care of me, right? So this is, and I believe if it's going to be happening, then after the last parliament elections, who was the surprise, Svoboda, we're going to see another Western Ukrainian surprise, Samopomic, and what a difference that makes. I believe the Ukrainians were voted for Svoboda for fight with the Donetsk rules, or with the Donetsk people in the government, with the Yanukovych clan, and now the Ukrainians are turning into something which is called Samopomic, and it's a very, very positive message that there is a resilience. But this is a totally different resilience. We want to be relying on ourselves more than ever before. And this is a fantastic message within a new Ukraine and creating a new Ukraine.
But a question, and maybe this is more of a question to Andrew, but that both of you can contribute to. Looking back, we had the Orange Revolution. This isn't the first time you've had a big change. And there's a lot of cynicism looking back that things weren't done. And it seems to a certain extent that this parliament, it's a make or break moment. That we've had some reforms, there's some legislation that's been put through, but Poroshenko and others have consistently said, it's really for the parliament after the election to set reforms in motion and to distinguish themselves and do that. And there's a lot of fear, people talk about a third Maidan, they talk about other protests, they talk about all the things that could happen if those promises aren't kept, if they aren't lived up to. Do you see kind of a fork in the road here? Is there potential for that going forward?
Sure, but I think we ought to be very careful about this talk about a third Maidan. That's Russia's preferred scenario. They're the people who talk about it the most.
There are a lot of Ukrainians who talk about it too.
Well, sure. But there's a lot of expectation of change for the better, and if Parliament doesn't deliver on that, then people will be alienated. But, both original Maidans were protests against the threat of dictatorship. You can't really rerun the same thing when you have a weak and badly performing democracy. That's a different scenario altogether. But, sure, people expect this to be maybe not the end, or even the beginning of the end, to misquote Churchill, but at least at the end of the beginning, a transition into some kind of change. It may well be a short-lived parliament. It may well be one step, and then the next parliament will be able to take bigger steps. And how long it lasts depends on how much pressure Russia puts on. It's going to be a very difficult winter. That's for sure.